used to say your name like it was a problem. Now they say it like it's prophecy. Because it is. You've shifted from being a passing conversation in the corner to becoming a headline in heaven's agenda. What they once called strange God has confirmed as sacred. What they overlooked is now overtaking. You didn't force your way in, you were called for such a time as this, and now your name is echoing with purpose. This is not fame, this is favor. You didn't campaign for attention, but something about your posture in obscurity made the heavens take notice. You moved in silence while God orchestrated sound. You kept walking when the spotlight was off. And now that it's on, you don't just shine, you reflect glory. Isaiah 60 verse 1 declares, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you." You are not arriving. You've already been sent. This is not your performance, it's your unveiling. I want to speak to the one who's been faithful in the shadows, the one who obeyed when it didn't make sense, the one who praised God through rejection, betrayal, silence, and closed doors. You didn't crumble. You cultivated. And now the fruit of that unseen faith is drawing attention you didn't even seek. Don't be confused. This spotlight is not a reward, it's a revelation. You're not being seen because you've changed, you're being seen because the time has... Let me affirm you today, your delay was not denial, it was divine development. The silence wasn't punishment, it was preparation. When you couldn't explain what God was doing, He was building something in you that couldn't be explained with words. Now the stillness that once looked like stagnation has become the stage for elevation. Psalm 23 verse 5 reminds us, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." God didn't remove them, He let them watch. They thought your surrender made you soft. What they didn't understand is surrender is the strongest weapon in the kingdom. You didn't clap back, you prayed forward. You didn't retaliate, you rested. You let God vindicate what man couldn't validate. And now what they once mocked has become the mark of your legitimacy. The same mouths that tried to destroy you are now the ones repeating your name with wonder. What used to be gossip has become gospel. See, when God elevates you, it doesn't come through noise, it comes through knowing. And what you know is this: no man can shut the door that God has opened. Luke 8 verse 17 tells us, "For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light." What was hidden in you is now being brought into the open, not to impress, but to impact. This is not a moment for ego, it's a moment for embodiment. You're not being applauded for talent, you're being recognized for truth. The systems that once ignored you can't unsee what God has stamped on your life. And while some still try to figure out how you got here, heaven knows you were carried by obedience, pressed by purpose, and sustained by oil. You're not trending, you're anointed. So brace yourself. Not because you're breaking down, but because you're breaking through. You're not just the talk of the town, you're a move of God in motion. They tried to bury your voice, but they didn't realize heaven was amplifying your silence. This is divine alignment. This is prophetic unveiling. This is your moment. You didn't have to say a word, your presence said enough. You felt it in the atmosphere before the handshake, before the introduction, before the exchange of pleasantries. The tension in the room didn't arise by accident. It was rehearsed. It was prepared. What you felt wasn't paranoia. It was discernment. They didn't just see you. They were prepped against you. There were whispers long before there was welcome. Because what you carry isn't ordinary, and the realm of darkness always tries to brace itself before light walks in. It wasn't about your tone. It was never about your posture. It was about your presence. You didn't just walk into rooms, you shifted spiritual climates. You interrupted rhythms built on false comfort and unholy agreements. You brought something ancient and holy into environments that had settled into compromise. And they didn't even know why they were uncomfortable around you. But in the spirit, they were already briefed. Before your feet hit the floor, hell held a meeting. Before they shook your hand, they formed an opinion. Your name was mentioned before you had a chance to make an impression. John 15, verse 18 to 19, reminds us that if the world hates us, it hated him first. That hatred isn't rooted in personality, it's born out of spiritual dissonance. You're not just disliked, you're disruptive. They weren't reacting to your behavior, they were reacting to your being. You showed up clothed in authenticity in a world dressed in pretense. You were marked before you were misunderstood. You were chosen before they tried to cancel you. And the resistance you met wasn't personal, it was prophetic. When God said in Jeremiah 1 verse 5, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." He wasn't just speaking identity, he was declaring warfare. Your life is a threat to every system that profits from deception. That's why you've walked into rooms where smiles were stretched thin and silence screamed louder than words. You were never supposed to blend in. You were designed to expose. And let's be honest, some didn't hate you. They hated the version of themselves that your presence made impossible to ignore. You became a mirror, and mirrors make people choose, transform, or turn away. You reminded them of everything they compromised, everything they buried, everything they once prayed for, but now pretend doesn't exist. You didn't come to flex, you came to reflect. But not everyone can handle that kind of confrontation. Psalm 37 verse 6 promises, "He will bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday." That's not just poetic, it's prophetic. Your light didn't need a microphone, it needed a moment. And that moment came, not with applause, but with adversity. Because systems don't fear noise, they fear divine alignment. They don't fear loudness, they fear holiness. You can fake charisma, but you can't manufacture glory. And what you carry is glory. They weren't just resisting you, they were resisting the God in you. The weight of your authenticity crushed their comfort. And for some, your integrity felt like an attack. That's why rooms turned cold. That's why eyes rolled before you even spoke. Because the oil you carry can't be diluted, and the calling on your life can't be dismissed. You weren't sent to entertain, you were sent to expose. This wasn't just social friction, it was spiritual warfare. Your arrival disrupted demonic agreements disguised as casual connections, and they felt it. They didn't fear your opinion, they feared your discernment. Because you see what others excuse, you hear what others ignore, you sense what others suppress. And no matter how they tried to spin the story, the truth remained. Your presence was the alarm clock in their delusion. So don't mislabel their behavior. Don't confuse hostility with hierarchy. You weren't beneath them, you were beyond their understanding. What felt like rejection was actually confirmation. They didn't respond that way because you failed. They responded that way because you revealed. And when God chooses someone to confront the counterfeit always panics. You never needed to fight for a seat. You were sent to flip the table. Friend, you didn't need a stage, a spotlight, or a speech. You didn't have to clear your throat or raise your voice. All it took was your entrance. Quiet, measured, covered in oil, and yet the room felt it before it understood it. Conversations shifted, smirks faded, distractions broke. Not because you demanded the room, but because heaven declared it yours. There is a kind of authority that doesn't announce itself because it was announced in the secret place. It's not pride, it's posture. You walk with the quiet confidence of someone who knows they've been sent, not just invited. Proverbs 18 verse 16 says that a person's gift makes room for them. But here's the mystery. They didn't even know you were the gift. You showed up in humility, but carried heaven's power. And without a single word, your presence began rearranging the spiritual furniture of the place. You didn't shift the room because of charisma. You shifted it because you were carrying kingdom clarity. What you carry exposes what they've tolerated. You're not loud, But the light in you makes noise. It shakes what's settled. It unmasks what's hidden. It confronts what's been comfortable too long. That's why the atmosphere grows tense. Not because you're threatening, but because truth is. There is a weight in your spirit that demonic forces cannot dismiss. Your stillness isn't passive, it's prophetic. The calm in you doesn't soothe the enemy, it unsettles him. When you walk in full alignment with God, you don't have to say much. Your presence speaks volumes. 2 Corinthians 4 verse 7 reminds us that we have this treasure in jars of clay, meaning you may look ordinary on the outside, but you house something eternal, something holy, something disruptive to anything not rooted in God. Isaiah 43 verse 1-2 declares that you are called by name, formed by the hand of God, and never abandoned when you walk through fire. That's why you carry peace in chaos. That's why rooms tilt in your direction. You aren't just walking in for yourself, you're walking in as a divine interruption. You didn't steal the attention. You shifted the atmosphere. You didn't plan it, but heaven appointed it. And let's be honest, some people didn't even realize why they were drawn to you, or why they felt uneasy around you. But in the realm of the Spirit, there was no confusion. You weren't just a person, you were a revelation, a walking contradiction to every lie they believed, a living reminder that purity still carries power, that holiness still shakes hell, that someone can carry both grace and grit and not lose their voice to culture. You're not playing a role. You are the evidence. God didn't send you to mimic anyone. He sent you to reveal what authenticity actually looks like. When you walk into a space carrying the presence of the Lord, even silent moments speak truth. Even your silence corrects. Even your glance convicts. Not because you're perfect, but because you're present, and heaven is present with you. They didn't know your name, but their spirit recognized your posture. You weren't trying to prove anything. You weren't asking for permission. You were simply being who God shaped you to be, and that's what makes the earth tremble. You didn't audition for attention, but now it follows you because favor flows through obedience, not popularity. This is why you can't afford to shrink. Not now. Not when God has dressed you in His authority and positioned you with such intentionality. Your very existence is a contradiction to every fake version of influence they've been feeding on. You are a course correction, a divine mirror, a breath of heaven in rooms filled with noise. Don't doubt it. That shift you felt wasn't pride, it was power, recognizing power. And when the Spirit of God rests on a person, hell doesn't need an announcement to get nervous. It recognizes the seal, the authority, the light. You're not walking in self-made confidence. You're walking in God-given covering. Your presence is the prophecy, and that's why the room can never stay the same. When patterns are predictable, they feel safe even if they're broken. Systems built on pretense don't fear destruction. They fear disruption. And you've chosen one with a disruption no one could explain. You didn't enter their world with arrogance yet. You triggered every unspoken insecurity. Not because you tried to be loud, but because you refused to bow. You didn't fit their formula. You didn't play the game. And when they couldn't categorize you, they tried to crucify you. Not with nails, but with whispers, with exclusion, with confusion cloaked in polite distance. But Romans 12 verse 2 already told us not to conform to the pattern of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. That's what you did. You chose renewal over repetition. You didn't carry rebellion, you carried revelation. It wasn't that you were too much. It's that they were too invested in shallow waters, and your depth made the shallowness obvious. The truth is, they couldn't handle the weight you brought. You weren't even trying to make a statement. You were just breathing authenticity in rooms addicted to performance. You weren't rude, you were real. And in a world that runs on curated images and filtered emotions, your raw honesty exposed their illusions. They called it resistance. Heaven called it righteousness. You didn't clap back, you carried conviction. You weren't trying to overthrow systems, you were just refusing to be swallowed by them. They labeled your honesty as rebellion because they've made a habit of serving dysfunction dressed as normal. There's a reason. 1 Peter 2 verse 9 declares that you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people set apart. It's because God never meant for you to blend in. You weren't born to be digestible. You were sent to be distinct. You weren't coded in the language of popularity. You were encoded in the truth of purpose. Every time you opened your mouth with purity, every time you stood your ground in silence, something in their system short-circuited. You were the glitch in their matrix, the holy virus that couldn't be assimilated. They had a script, a flow, a structure they expected you to follow, and when you didn't, it scared them. Because systems can only control what they can predict. But you carried the unpredictable rhythm of heaven. You didn't need applause to feel validated. You didn't crave attention to feel anointed. That alone made you dangerous in rooms that fed on affirmation and ego. You walked differently, talked differently, believed differently. Not because you were trying to stand out, but because God set you apart before you took your first breath. Isaiah 30 verse 21 speaks of a voice behind you saying, "This is the way, walk in it." That's how you've been moving, not by trends, not by pressure, but by divine instruction. And because you walk with that kind of direction, they couldn't track you. That's why they mocked what they couldn't understand. That's why they gossiped about what they couldn't grasp. You weren't misunderstood, you were uncontainable. You made them uncomfortable without trying because your life is a contradiction to their compromise. Every time they tried to push you out, they made space for your calling to expand. Every time they denied you access, they unknowingly gave you permission to rise outside their gates. You didn't blend into their circles because you weren't made for circles, you were made for crowns. You didn't come to imitate what already existed. You came to introduce what heaven has been preparing in secret. Your difference isn't your weakness, it's your divine weapon. Your discernment isn't paranoia, it's prophetic clarity. And what they labeled as too intense was actually your spiritual sensitivity, calling out the things they were too numb to feel. You don't match the code of comfort. You weren't meant to. Because the kingdom you represent doesn't run on convenience, it runs on conviction. You don't need to rewrite yourself to be readable. Let them misunderstand. Let them call your anointing awkward and your clarity offensive. Let them sit in confusion while you walk in your calling. God didn't ask you to shrink for their comfort. He sent you to stand fully awake, fully aligned, fully armed. And here's the truth. They never saw coming. The same presence they tried to push out is the same presence that's now shifting everything around them. Because when God codes someone in heaven's language, no amount of earthly mislabeling can cancel what's already been commissioned. And while they misread your quiet, heaven was writing your comeback. They watched, waited, and even wagered on your collapse. But what they underestimated was that your silence was not surrender, it was strategy. While they sharpened rumors like weapons, you wrapped yourself in grace like armor. You didn't rush to defend your name because you knew who held it. You didn't scramble for revenge because you trusted the one who vindicates. Grace became your greatest form of resistance. Not the kind that shrinks back, but the kind that stands firm. Not the kind that tolerates injustice, but the kind that transcends it. When you were slandered, you didn't retaliate, you reflected light. You didn't need a platform to clap back, because heaven had already written the comeback. Romans 12 verse 19 reminds us clearly, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath." You left room and God filled it with favor. There were moments when you could have exposed them, moments when the truth could have shattered their reputations in an instant. But instead you let God be your voice in the silence. You chose dignity when you had every reason to deliver destruction. That wasn't weakness, that was warfare. Real warfare doesn't always look like battle cries. Sometimes it looks like composure in the face of chaos. Sometimes it looks like peace that passes understanding while the enemy stirs confusion. And it shook them. They didn't expect your grace to cut deeper than any accusation. They didn't know that silence in the mouth of the righteous can sound like thunder in the halls of hell. Psalm 37 verse 7 says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes." You waited, and in that waiting, you won a war they didn't even know you were fighting. You never lowered yourself to match their energy. You didn't throw shade, you stood in the sun. You didn't degrade them to prove a point, you let your presence do the talking. While they built traps with their tongues, you built altars with your tears. You were mocked, misunderstood, and misquoted. But still you kept showing up with love. Still you kept choosing holiness over hostility. They called your calm weakness, but God called it wisdom. They mistook your quiet for retreat, but it was a recalibration. You didn't yell over the noise, you simply rose above it. Matthew 5 verse 11 to 12 says, "Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven." And now that reward is beginning to unfold, not just in glory, but in peace, in strength, in clarity, in the power that doesn't announce itself, but changes everything it touches. You carried grace like it was fire, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that purifies. You didn't just survive the lies, you let them refine you. Every insult was a polishing cloth on the jewel of your anointing. Every betrayal was fuel for deeper dependence. And every back turned against you was a back God never needed you to lean on in the first place. You didn't let betrayal harden you. You let it hollow you out so God could fill you deeper. They underestimated the strength of someone who didn't need to scream to prove a point. Because real power doesn't posture, it persists. And you persisted even when it was lonely, even when the applause turned to absence, even when the ones you held up turned their backs. You still chose grace, and grace chose you. What they meant for humiliation has become your coronation. They tried to bury you under the weight of gossip and offense, but instead you used that ground as the platform for your next level. Grace wasn't just your reaction, it was your revolution. It was the sword you wielded without swinging, the weapon you carried without drawing blood, the quiet that cut deeper than chaos ever could. And now they're left staring, not because you shouted, but because you stood. Not because you exposed them, but because God exalted you. Grace was never passive. It was power cloaked in humility. And in that grace you fought and won a battle hell never saw coming. Beloved, some victories don't come with parades, they come with proof. And proof, my friend, is what your life has become. Not proof of perfection, but proof of preservation. Proof that even when hell hosts a conference with your name on the agenda, God still holds the final word. They had blueprints drawn and narratives rehearsed. They calculated the angles and synchronized the sabotage. But what they didn't count on, what they could never account for, was the God who interrupts every evil masterpiece with divine mercy. What happened to you wasn't just betrayal. It was betrayal in bulk. This wasn't personal gossip. It was a network of sabotage. It had layers, systems, and shadows. This was a setup designed to collapse your credibility and erase your influence. Some of them weren't even strangers. They were familiar voices turned foreign. And yet over 300 tongues wagged plans, whispered in dark rooms, emails sent, alliances formed, and still you rose. You rose because no amount of plotting can cancel what God has already positioned. They worked overtime trying to write your ending. But while they were rehearsing your funeral, heaven was preparing your coronation. It was never just drama. It was war. a spiritual conspiracy masked in casual slander, coded glances, and weaponized silence. But the God you serve doesn't miss meetings, even the secret ones held in your absence. Luke 12 verse 2 echoes with fire. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed or hidden that will not be made known. And make no mistake, what they buried is now being broadcast. You didn't shout. You didn't retaliate. You didn't break formation. You obeyed. And your obedience was the divine interference their schemes couldn't withstand. While they played checkers, God played chess, and he moved one divine glitch into their blueprint that made the entire system collapse. Your stillness exposed their striving. Your peace unveiled their panic. They spent so much time orchestrating your fall that they fell into the very thing they created. Isaiah 54 verse 17 declares it boldly, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." But let's make something clear. The weapons were real. They were formed, sharpened, launched. But God didn't just block them, he reversed them. That's the God you serve. A God who not only rescues you from the fire, but causes the fire to backfire. He let them dig deep enough not to bury you, but to bury themselves. Like Haman in the book of Esther, they built the gallows for you, only to be hung by their own plans. There's something holy about watching the enemy's efforts collapse, not because you gloated, but because you grew. Genesis 50 verse 20 frames it perfectly. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Your survival wasn't just personal, it was prophetic. It wasn't just for you. It was for the hundreds watching silently, waiting to see if the storm would swallow you. And instead they watched you walk on what was meant to drown you. What they plotted in secrecy is now unraveling in public. The curtain has been pulled back, the script flipped, the illusion shattered. You thought you were being buried, but God was building a platform. What was meant to isolate you has now highlighted you. What was meant to destroy your name has only amplified the name of the Lord through your life. Luke 12 verse 2 didn't just uncover the darkness, it made your light unmistakable. You didn't just escape a trap, you became a testament, a walking interruption to the enemy's forecast, a living display of what it looks like when God doesn't just deliver someone, he displays them. Because your deliverance wasn't quiet, it wasn't hidden, it was loud, public, inevitable. They tried to write you out of the script, and now you're standing center stage with heaven as your spotlight. Your presence now confronts what their schemes could never contain. They built the trap, but God made it a stage. Not so you could perform, but so you could point. So you could lift your hands and say, "This wasn't my doing. This was the Lord's." Because the greatest plot twist of all isn't that you survived. It's that God used their plan to reveal his. And now you stand in the open, not exposed in shame, but exalted in glory. You didn't have to announce yourself, your presence did that before your mouth ever opened. The moment you walked in with a quiet confidence, something shifted. It wasn't your words that stirred them. It was your knowing. A kind of knowing that pierced through pretense and cracked the surface of everything they pretended to be. They smiled at you, yes, but behind the smiles their spirit trembled, because truth doesn't need volume to confront. It just needs presence. And your presence carried the weight of discernment. Discernment is dangerous to those living behind masks. When the Spirit of God sharpens your perception, you start seeing what others are still trying to conceal. You stop being impressed by positions and start discerning intentions. You don't just hear what they're saying, you sense what they're hiding. And that is why you became a problem. Because while they played the game of deception, you carried the eyes of the Spirit. Hebrews 5 verse 14 says it clearly, "But solid food is for the mature who because of practice have their senses trained to discern good and evil." That's you. You weren't judging. You were discerning. And they couldn't handle being seen. They mistook your quiet for passivity, but your silence was strategy. Your restraint wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. You weren't out to destroy anyone's image, but the truth you carried started confronting theirs. You didn't react, you recognized. You saw through the performance. You picked up on what wasn't being said. Your peace made their chaos louder. Your clarity made their confusion unbearable. That's why they began to twist your insight into instability, because it's easier to call a prophet crazy than to confess you're convicted. They didn't fear your opinion, they feared your perception. They needed to discredit your discernment because your discernment was a threat. You were sent into rooms as a mirror, not a megaphone, and what they saw reflected back at them was everything they didn't want to deal with. When Matthew 10 verse 16 says, "Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves," it wasn't suggesting you shrink back. It was reminding you that divine awareness is your greatest armor in dark places. You didn't come to expose people, you came carrying light. And when light shows up, shadows panic. Don't be surprised they tried to make you doubt yourself. That's the enemy's oldest trick, to confuse your gift as a flaw, to make you believe that sensing too deeply means something is wrong with you. But God didn't give you spiritual radar to be silenced. He gave it to you so you could navigate territory that others would get lost in. They needed you to second-guess yourself because your first instinct was already divine intelligence. Proverbs 2 verse 6 to 8 reminds us, "For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity." That shield has been surrounding you even when their words were trying to cut you. They wanted you to question your clarity so you would stop trusting your own discernment. Because as long as you believed your radar, you were immune to their manipulation. They wanted access to your influence but had to pass through the gate of your knowing, and they couldn't. So they branded your gift as a glitch. But God has been your defender all along. He has been affirming what they denied. Every whisper of doubt they tried to plant, God has been uprooting with reassurance in your secret place. Let me be clear. You were not unstable. You were ahead. You weren't too much. You were just too discerning for deception to stay comfortable. What they labeled as sensitive was actually spirit sensitivity. You heard the tone behind the words. You noticed the spirit behind the smile. And now you understand your discernment was not just protection, it was promotion. It didn't just guard you from harm, it positioned you for trust. The right people will be drawn to it, the right places will require it, and the right seasons will reward it. They tried to make you small because your knowing made them feel exposed. But you were never meant to fit in their boxes, you were designed to carry divine sight. You carry a gift the world tries to mute. But heaven endorses what man misunderstands. Your clarity is not a curse, it's a calling. And the more they resist it, the more God reveals why you were chosen to see what others ignore. Because what they call intimidation, heaven calls insight. Some stories aren't cleared by shouting, they're cleared by standing. And you stood. You stood when your name was misused, when rooms were filled with whispers you didn't start, and when silence felt like surrender, but was actually sacred strategy. You didn't defend yourself, you trusted the defender. And while others ran to claim platforms, you remained in posture. While they weaponized words, you wielded wisdom. You didn't need to plead your case, heaven was already working it out. Vindication doesn't always come wrapped in noise, it comes dressed in clarity. And that clarity has begun to surround your name. The very people who misunderstood you now sit quietly in the wake of what God has made undeniable. The lies didn't just fall apart, they dissolved under the weight of your consistency. Exodus 14 verse 14 reminds us, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." You didn't retreat, you rested. And your rest became resistance against every attempt to drag you into a war that wasn't yours to fight. They expected you to clap back, to retaliate, to prove yourself. But instead you chose peace over pride. You chose presence over performance. And in doing so, you left room for God to move. Silence when spirit-led is not weakness, it is warfare. When you stopped explaining, God started revealing. When you stopped running after validation, vindication began running after you. You outlived what was said about you, not through defense but through demonstration. Psalm 35 verse 1 echoes this truth. Contend, Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. And he did. Not with chaos, but with clarity. Not with vengeance, but with visibility. Some thought your silence meant you were defeated. What they didn't see was that silence was your altar. It was where you surrendered the need to be understood and embraced the power of being aligned. And now that alignment is speaking louder than any defense ever could. The narrative flipped, not because you forced it, but because you followed God when it made no sense. Your obedience became your evidence. Your posture became your platform. And without raising your voice, your presence began to carry authority. Now you walk into rooms with the kind of grace that can't be manufactured, and a peace that confuses those who once plotted your downfall. What once was mockery has become momentum. The thing they tried to bury is now what God is breathing on. The story they twisted is now the testimony heaven is using. Isaiah 41 verse 10 declares, Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. That's not just a verse, it's been your reality. He upheld you when you wanted to speak but chose to trust. He strengthened you when your reputation felt fragile. He helped you by writing a future that your past couldn't cancel. What was once a whisper about you is now a wonder surrounding you. People don't just ask what happened, they wonder how you endured. But here's the truth. God was always orchestrating a silent comeback. He didn't need a mic to magnify you. He needed a moment, and that moment has come. Now your name walks ahead of you, not for ego, but for evidence. Evidence that God exalts those who humble themselves. Evidence that presence is more prophetic than performance. Evidence that when you let go of control, heaven takes hold of the outcome. You've become the proof that spiritual justice isn't about loud vindication, it's about lasting fruit. They tried to bury you with words, but fruit grew from the grave. And now, without lifting a finger, without chasing applause, and without bowing to bitterness, you're seeing what God can do with a life that chooses faith over fighting. You didn't scream for justice. You simply survived long enough for justice to speak on your behalf. Beloved, the very atmosphere that once resisted you is responding to what's on you. They once rolled their eyes when you entered the room. Now they're reshaping entire strategies around your movements. Isn't it something? The same ones who dismissed you are now decoding you. The same tables that refused your voice are now echoing your tone. What felt like exile was actually elevation disguised as isolation. And now, without shifting your identity, you've shifted the atmosphere. They mocked your fire when they couldn't handle its heat, but when their candles kept blowing out, they came looking for your flame. You didn't scream to be seen, you simply stayed the course. You didn't contort yourself to be accepted, you remained authentic when artificial was trending. And now your consistency is contagious. You became the template they secretly study but refuse to credit. And that's okay. You weren't doing it for credit, you were doing it for calling. Isaiah 60 verse 15 declares, Though you have been forsaken and hated with no one traveling through, I will make you the everlasting pride and the joy of all generations. You're stepping into that word not just as a survivor, but as a standard. See, when you walk in anointing, you don't need applause to prove legitimacy. You are the evidence. What they once resisted, they're now rewriting into their routines. You became the unexpected blueprint. And the irony, You didn't hand them notes. Your silence spoke. Your process preached. Your stillness became their syllabus. While others were performing, you were becoming. While they focused on optics, you focused on oil, and the oil speaks louder than opinions ever could. They didn't just change their language, they're adjusting their behavior. They used to take shots. Now they take notes. They used to scoff at your pace. Now they study your posture. Because you didn't demand the stage, you became the stage. Your obedience, your dignity, your refusal to sell your soul for shortcuts, it became the measuring stick in circles that once rejected you. That's not pride. That's prophecy. Revelation 3 verse 8 says, "See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." You didn't force it open. You just kept walking until heaven made it swing wide. What was once your burden has now become their breakthrough. They watched you suffer with grace, and it shifted something. You weren't loud, but you were loud in the spirit. You didn't just walk through storms, you became the forecast. Your endurance wasn't for aesthetics, it was apostolic. You changed frequencies. You interrupted patterns. You reset norms without needing permission. They can't explain you, but they can't escape you either. Because when God marks someone, the echo doesn't fade, it multiplies. It's a strange sight, isn't it? To witness your former critics mimic the very things they used to mock. But that's the weight of divine reversal. Matthew 21 verse 42 reminds us, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." You were overlooked, but not by God. What they called too much is now being used to build the very structures they couldn't dream without. Your originality is now the foundation for their imitation. But don't let it shake your soul. Stay rooted. Stay royal. Because you didn't arrive here by crafting an image, you arrived by carrying identity. And identity cannot be imitated. What you carry isn't cosmetic, it's covenant. They may wear your style, quote your phrases, or mimic your strategy, but what they can never replicate is your surrender. They didn't see the crushing. They didn't witness the nights where you almost gave up. They missed the cost behind your character. But heaven saw it all, and that's why the doors are opening. Not because of hype, but because of humility. You didn't bend to become palatable. You stood, and the world adjusted. You're not just being celebrated now. You're being studied. Not because you performed, but because you prevailed. Not because you competed, but because you carried something eternal. You were the shift. You are the shift. And where you once felt like the misfit, you're now the model. You didn't change for them. They're changing because of you. But what they're witnessing now goes deeper than admiration. It's resurrection in real time. They thought it was over for you. Not just stalled dead. Buried beneath the weight of disappointment, overlooked potential, and a past that tried to keep its grip on your future. But look around now. You're not walking in recovery. You're walking in resurrection. This isn't just a story of survival. This is the spark of revolution. What looked like the end was actually the echo of God's voice saying, "Live again." Just like he breathed into dry bones in Ezekiel 37, verse 4-5. He's breathed over your story, and now everything that was counted out is standing tall, full of life and purpose. Resurrection doesn't start with applause. It begins in silence, in graves, in places no one celebrates. It starts with a God who sees you under the weight, not past it, and speaks into the dust of what used to be. And that's exactly what he did for you. You weren't supposed to bounce back from what hit you. You weren't expected to stand after the collapse. They watched the storm hit and assumed it would be your last breath. But God didn't just restore your breath. He reintroduced your voice. You didn't rise quietly. You rose with a roar. This wasn't about trending. It wasn't about proving people wrong. You didn't claw your way to relevance. You were called out of a tomb. And now that you're here, you're not just a name. They see a movement. You didn't glow up for appearances. You glowed through the darkness, through the wounds, through the nights that made no sense. That light in you, it's not manufactured. It's born of fire. Isaiah 61 verse 3 says, "He gives beauty for ashes, and you are walking radiant proof." They buried you like seed, not realizing that resurrection doesn't bury the past. It uses it as fertilizer. You didn't just break out, you bloomed. And what bloomed wasn't just strength. It was wisdom. It was vision. It was legacy. The very thing they thought would disqualify you became the thing that qualified you to speak life into others. Romans 8 verse 18 declares that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed. That glory, it's shining on your face now. It's in the way you speak, the way you move, the way you carry the presence of God without explanation. And now the town talks. But it's not in whispers anymore, it's in awe. Because they saw what you came out of, and there's no earthly reason you should have emerged whole. They knew your name when it was surrounded by doubt. Now they speak it with reverence because what was written off has been rewritten by the hand of God. This is no comeback story, it's a coronation. You didn't crawl out of the pit to earn a seat, you were crowned in the ashes. Where shame once sat, glory now rests. You carry something now, not hype, not ego, but holy weight. You shift atmospheres when you enter not because of your volume, but because of your victory. The same system that tried to silence you now echoes with the sound of your resilience. What once tried to erase your name now carries your legacy in its story. You didn't beat the system by outshouting it, you rewrote it by outlasting it. You're not a response to the pressure, you are the response of heaven. So walk with your head high, not in pride, but in praise. The town that tried to shut you up now watches every step, not because you asked them to, but because God made your life a testimony they can't ignore. What was whispered in rooms behind your back is now proclaimed in places your feet couldn't even reach before. You are the fire they can't extinguish. And you didn't just come back, you came back crowned. Friend, you didn't rise for recognition. You rose because heaven had something to reveal through you. What once looked like small obedience has grown into undeniable evidence. They thought they were watching a moment. What they were really witnessing was the movement of prophecy. You were never just someone in the crowd, you were the spark that heaven sent to shift the atmosphere. And what they whispered about in passing has become the headline of a divine unveiling. The rooms you walk into now feel different, not because you're demanding attention, but because God has chosen you to carry weight that cannot be ignored. This isn't ego. This isn't self-promotion. This is divine commissioning. You were never raised up to be admired. You were raised to be followed. Just as Matthew 5 verse 14 declares, "You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden." Your light is not optional. It's not seasonal. It's not even yours to withhold. It is the mark of God's trust placed on your life to lead even when you're still healing, to shine even when you feel stretched. This mantle didn't come wrapped in applause. It came wrapped in obedience. It was stitched together by the moments no one clapped for, by the decisions that cost you comfort, by the prayers that broke you open in secret. What they mocked has matured into authority. What they doubted is now walking down the center of the very roads they tried to block. You're not on display for decoration. You're on assignment. Your visibility is not vanity, it's velocity. God is accelerating something through you that cannot be stopped, and it isn't for your glory, it's for His. You are the evidence that obedience echoes louder than applause. Because while the town was talking, you were building. While they were mocking, you were maturing. While they were whispering, you were worshipping. And now the talk has turned into testimony. This is what happens when someone refuses to bend bow or break under pressure. This is what happens when someone decides that favor isn't something to chase. It's something to carry with humility. And if you've ever wondered why God chose you to carry such weight, remember this, because He knew you wouldn't bury it in fear. You'd build with it. You'd walk with it. You'd shine through it. You are the light they didn't expect the shift. They couldn't predict the revelation they couldn't cancel. Isaiah 62 verse 2 says, "The nations will see your righteousness, and all kings your glory." That means you weren't just positioned to shine locally, you were anointed to shine globally. Your life is prophetic placement in motion. Let them talk. Let them watch. Just make sure heaven can still hear the sound of your obedience cutting through the noise. Because this light wasn't given to you by man, and that means no man can take it away. As 1 Samuel 2 verse 30 reminds us, "Those who honor me, I will honor." And that's what you've done. You've honored God in silence, in secret, in storms. Now comes the reward that only heaven can orchestrate. You are no longer the subject of speculation, you are the signpost of God's sovereignty. This is not the moment to shrink, this is the moment to steward. Don't dim yourself because of their discomfort. Don't second-guess the spotlight God gave you. Instead, wear it like a mantle. Move with reverence. Walk with authority. Speak with the clarity of someone who's been through the fire and came out gold. Before we close this message, I want to invite you into a moment of heartfelt, fervent prayer. Wherever you are, don't just watch, join in. Lift your spirit, open your heart, and let's talk to the one who authored your story from the beginning. Heavenly Father, we come to you with grateful hearts, hearts that have been crushed, stretched, challenged, and shaped, but still choose to beat with praise. We lift our hands not to impress man, but to surrender everything to the God who called us before anyone else ever recognized us. You saw us when we were overlooked. You chose us when we were dismissed. You covered us when they tried to bury us. And now we stand not in pride, but in awe of what you've done. Thank you, Lord, for the light you've placed within us. Not a spotlight for show, but a light that carries purpose, truth, and power. We don't take lightly the influence you've entrusted to us. We don't take for granted the mantle you've placed on our shoulders. We are not here to be praised. We are here to be poured out for your glory alone. God, for every room that was filled with resistance, thank you for giving us peace instead of retaliation. For every word spoken against us, thank you for silencing it with your justice. For every delay we misunderstood, thank you for revealing it as divine timing. You were never late, never absent, never unsure. You were working even when we couldn't trace you. And now we look around and see that your fingerprints are everywhere. So Lord, keep us humble in this season of recognition. Remind us daily that it's not about the crowd, it's about the cross. Let our lives preach louder than our platforms. Let our character shine brighter than our name. Let us never forget that we carry oil not earned by effort, but given by grace. May we walk with reverence, speak with wisdom, and serve with joy. Father, when the voices of man grow loud, remind us that your voice still carries more weight. When applause tries to lead us, anchor us in assignment. When others copy what you've birthed in us, let us respond with grace, not pride. Let us celebrate what you're doing in and through us, without making idols of visibility or influence. We don't want the stage without the spirit. We don't want visibility without virtue. We want you more than anything else. And Lord, for every person watching this right now who may feel overlooked, doubted, or dismissed, breathe on them with fresh fire. Remind them that you've not forgotten them, that what they carry still matters, that obscurity is not punishment, it's preparation, that they are being formed in the dark for something that can only live in the light. Let their yes rise again. Let their faith be restored. Let their voice return with boldness, because you are not finished writing their story. We don't need validation to obey. We don't need attention to believe. And we don't need man's approval to move forward. You have already said yes over us. You've already opened doors no man can shut. So now with everything in us, we say yes back to you. Again, deeper, stronger, louder. Yes to the call. Yes to the cost. Yes to the climb. Yes to the crown. Thank you, God, for making us not just seen but sent. Not just admired but assigned. Not just the talk of the town, but the turning point you've chosen for such a time as this. We give you all the glory. We return every crown at your feet. We exalt no name above yours. This is your doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. In Jesus' mighty and matchless name, Amen. If this message has stirred something deep in your spirit, I warmly invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their obedience still matters. Thank you for being part of this bold, faith-filled community. May God continue to reveal His purpose through your presence and use your life as a turning point for others.